The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
Welcome to Giles of LA Podcast. I'm your host, Giles Farrell. Across the table from me in person is Ben Remington.
Hello.
Ben, it was quite another uneventful week for the Minnesota Wild. we had some almost, and then we had the NHL Draft, which was just as equally uneventful. Just if you compare it to recent drafts. But oof, not a lot of action for a team that's kind of preaching winds of change.
Yeah, to say the least. The draft was interesting. I don't know. We can get into more in depth later, but yeah, it was disappointing. The whole week, I think, on the whole, was disappointing. Just a lot of things that kind of really leave you baffled as a Wild fan, because it really does seem like business as usual, which is exactly what a lot of people didn't want. So that's tough.
So before we dive into all that fun stuff, the first newsworthy thing we had this week was the NHL schedule release.
Yeah.
Which included the season home opener on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man, did the NHL milk this out. They do it every year. It's worse and worse, and it is almost NFL-esque in the way that they milk it out, with just minus all the TV programming that comes along with it, if you will. Maybe
Right.
NHL Network did something, but yeah. But anyway, the season opener, it comes Thursday, October 4th in Colorado against the much-despised Colorado Avalanche. And then 2 days later is followed up by the home opener, Saturday, October 6th, against the defending Western Conference champion, Vegas Golden Knights, making their only appearance to St. Paul right off the hop in the regular season. Other things of note in the schedule, the 2 trips to Las Vegas, Nevada, which come in January on the 21st, which is a Monday, and then again in March on the 29th, which is a Friday. And for those thinking of going, the Giles and the Goalie podcast is eyeing the January game.
The wonderful MLK Day game. It's actually an early start.
Hashtag GATG in Vegas. But that should be fun. Any other things on the schedule catch your eye? I mean, it's not like the NFL schedule where you're not sure who you might play or when you might play, but it's basically the same thing every year. It's just what games fall on what dates to line it up for a road trip.
Right.
So the marquee one being Vegas, as those who didn't make it out last year, going against the NCAA basketball tournament.
Yes.
Get 2 shots at it this year.
Yeah, and that was obviously 100% what we were focused on, because we had kind of had laid down the edict that we were going to Vegas this year, and I think that works out pretty well. It works out extremely well for me, who would already kind of had a late January Vegas trip in the works, so it works out very well. Then that March one's kind of nice, too. It's Sweet 16 weekend, which might be as conflated as the first weekend of the NCAA tournament, but a Friday night, which is cool, just like it was this past season. So those are certainly dates that you circle on your calendar, for folks that want to go out to Vegas. A few more other notes. I mean, there's an extremely long road trip in there. The longest in Wild history, I believe, was 7 games, where they kind of tour around the entire western half of the continent.
Yeah.
And, one more that I noticed was the New Year's Eve game is back in St. Paul. I believe they haven't had one in a couple of seasons. It used to be pretty often. Then they took a couple of years off, I feel like. But they are hosting the Penguins on New Year's Eve, so that will be a very interesting game. Also, I found myself looking for Blackhawks games, but then I was kind of like,
What's the grab there?
Do you circle those on the calendar anymore? I don't know that you do. I mean, I guess you still do, because I'm sure there's a rivalry there, and let's not pretend like there isn't. But
the old North Star war horses will always circle those on the calendar, but I especially with the way the Blackhawks were this last year, it kind of lost its appeal a little bit. But speaking of North Stars, sidebar, I took my first trip to the IKEA on the former site of the Met Center today.
Yeah.
Middle finger raised viciously in the air at Norm Green.
Sure.
But
you had never been there before?
No, I
really?
have never been.
It's been open for like 10 years.
Yeah, I'd never been there. Been to the Mall of America plenty of times. Never been into IKEA.
It's very interesting. I've heard it described as being herded like cattle.
It's something, let me tell you.
Yeah, it is.
But
especially if you like meatballs. Also, one last thing that I just remembered: they play the Preds 3 times in March.
Oh, that's
and
death.
That's very interesting. That's a very, very interesting setup. They don't play any team obviously nearly that much to wind down the season. They do play the Jets, I believe, the second to last game, which that might be academic at that point for either team. Who knows? But 3 games against the Preds in March, that sets up things very interesting. If obviously you would expect both teams to be challenging for a playoff spot or more at that time.
Breaking news here on the Giles and the Goalie podcast as we record.
What happened?
John Carlson re-signing in Washington.
Yeah, we kind of knew that was going to happen when they ditched Orpik.
8 years, $8 million. Also, as we transition into the NFL draft, what the hell? What an incredible deal for Washington to get rid of Brooks Orpik as they trade Philip Grubauer to the Avalanche.
Yeah.
Which, not good for Central Division opponents that Philip Grubauer goes to the Avalanche, but the fact that they unloaded Brooks Orpik's contract and then Colorado went on to buy him out.
How many years did he have left?
Just 1.
Oh, that's not bad.
Just for the lump sum of
Gotcha.
A second-round pick was... And Brooks Orpik was the most common name I saw above Tyler Ennis on popular buyouts.
On Cap Friendly?
Not just Cap Friendly, but just like...
everywhere.
All the articles about popular players who should get bought out. Like Brooks Orpik was number 1 just because the Capitals had to re-sign John Carlson somehow.
Why didn't they just buy him out if it's only 1 year left? I mean, I get that affects their cap, but...
They found a good leverage spot for teams wanting Philip Grubauer.
Yeah,
so.
that's a good point. If you take Grubauer, you got to take Orpik with him, I suppose, was probably the pitch to everyone.
Incredible that a team kind of figured out their situation and was able to successfully maneuver around it, unlike the Ottawa Senators or even the Minnesota Wild, who have an albatross contract on their books, or several. Who knows?
But they also don't have a piece like Grubauer that everybody wants.
Right.
I mean, they do, but not one that's expendable, at least.
Speaking of things people want, the Minnesota Wild reportedly were shopping 3 of their higher priority forwards, if you will, this last week. The likes of Jason Zucker, Charlie Coyle, Nino Niederreiter via The Athletic were the most talked about or heavily discussed, and then there was a trade with Arizona that fell through the works, and we can slam on this first.
Yeah.
I know you did a little bit on the Hockey Wilderness podcast on Friday night, but a proposed trade of Jason Zucker, Nino Niederreiter, and Tyler Ennis going to Arizona for Max Domi and Christian Dvorak.
All right.
And I had to punch in Christian Dvorak into my computer just to see what was good with him, and boy, was I underwhelmed. And Max Domi also a fine player, but I was also underwhelmed. So, why?
Well, that's the price that you pay when you want somebody to eat a contract, right? Like we saw that with, I think it was the Brian Bickle contract where they had to send Teravainen down to Carolina.
To the Hurricanes, who were equally active this week.
Right. So that's kind of that's what you have to do, and our friend Tony, manager of the Hockey Wilderness podcast, wrote on Friday about how you don't want to deal Ennis, because any trade where you get rid of him, you're going to lose so much value in return. And then it comes back to the argument that you made that we talked about on the podcast last week, your article on Monday, where you might as well keep him. I mean, It doesn't lose you any assets to keep Tyler Ennis. Even buying him out doesn't lose you any assets. So it was interesting to me. It basically, like we talked about on the podcast with Hockey Wilderness guys, where Domi and Dvorak for Nino straight up would be something would be a trade that nobody would be like, oh my god. But to get rid of Tyler Ennis, you have to include the value of Jason Zucker. Like, that's a lot of value to tie to a trade just to dump off a 1-year contract. I mean, basically what you're looking to avoid there is you're saving 4.6 this year instead of 2.6, and you're saving the 1.2 next year for the buyout. So you're saving $3 million across 2 years. For that, you're going to get rid of Jason Zucker. You got to be out of your mind to make that deal, which luckily they didn't, obviously.
I wrote a thing last week on Zone Coverage about Tyler Ennis and his contract and the Wild seemingly being able to work around it. If that's the price, I take that all back. Don't do that. Don't really hamstring your roster that much more just to get rid of that contract, and you can figure it out. And as we saw this week, the salary cap's going to be $79.5 million. Yeah. So just coming in under that $80 million I had projected it out at. And so I will understand if Tyler Ennis gets bought out, but don't make a dumb deal like that just to get around that contract. And as much as I would like to see Tyler Ennis join the likes of noted Coyotes legends Pavel Datsyuk, Chris Pronger joining the buyout club down there in the desert. But, that, as we talked about before the show, you had to remind me that thing was a thing, that trade, because I had completely blocked it from memory just because of how ridiculous it was sounding to everyone. But, yikes. Anyway.
Yeah. And we don't know who proposed that trade, I don't think. I don't think the Wild proposed that trade, because if you're John Chayka, how do you decline that trade? I mean, my God. You take that trade in a heartbeat. Yeah. So if that's Arizona sending that trade up to Minnesota, I'm not as worried about it. And it had to be. It absolutely had to be. And so if that's what they propose, then, well, fine. That's good on them for trying to make a trade that absolutely fleeces the Wild. That's their job.
Wild taking a lot of calls on Jason Zucker, and, I know that is not popular among fans. He's a popular player, appears on a local radio show frequently, but the thing that it is, he's valuable. He has value, and you don't want to move him just to move him, but when you're looking at players of value on this roster, he's one of the few that actually has it, and you could get a decent return for.
Yeah.
So I also think we're still in that Paul Fenton is learning what players carry the most value on his roster. And so I take everything with a grain of salt as he's just trying to figure all that out. But we'll probably see some move of value this week, I hope.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It was a very uneventful NHL draft, so that hopefully makes me believe there will be some eventful things happening this week. Hopefully the likes of Erik Karlsson get on the move and whatnot. But transferring into the NHL draft, we saw no action leading up to the draft whatsoever on Friday night. As usually you see trades come down, but the teams speculated to be maybe moving a pick in the first round. Those with multiple picks kind of pegged to believe they would maybe make a move. They didn't. It was a very uneventful first round, and the only thing really was the actual picks themselves, which was the big thing from Friday night. And Minnesota, with their 24th overall selection in the draft, they held on to it. It was weird. They had a first-round pick, but they take Swedish defenseman Philip Johansson, who was very much off the board.
Yeah.
As I tweeted out, who?
Yeah.
I'll let you go on with this.
Yeah, So I did lots of draft prep. Hopefully you read it and enjoyed it at zonecoverage.com. I profiled 12 players. 12 players that were possibilities for the Wild, and I believe 9 to 10 of them were available when they picked. So, hey, your boy nailed it.
Yeah,
and
you got it.
And so I was really looking forward to a handful of them. Dominic Bach was chief among them. I would have been happy with Ty Dellandrea had he not been picked earlier. Akil Thomas was a name that was all right. Ryan McLeod was a name that I could have dealt with. All the names. Any player that I profiled, I was like, you know what? There's pros and cons here. Some of these guys are safe picks. Some of these guys are home run swings. But, had the Wild taken any of those players, I would have been like, all right, they got good value, or at least they, took a player with some upside or whatever. Instead, they perform a reach so extreme that it baffled the panel at on NBA CSN. Like when you have Bob McKenzie completely unable to defend your actions, like that's a sign, and like
the GOAT, Bobby Margarita.
Right. And like when every draft pundit is like, "What are you doing?" Like, and then obviously the avalanche of positive words about Johansson come out afterwards from the Wild brass, and it's just like, we belabored the hell out of this point in the Hockey Wilderness podcast. If you want really good raw emotional reaction to this draft pick, Joe Booley had
coming in hot.
Yeah, Joe Booley had almost like a nuclear meltdown on us at the table. And I was my usual ranty self, and it was it was a lot of fun talking with Tony and also Greg from Hockey Wilderness about how horrible this pick was, and for so many different reasons. But it's just like this guy was maybe a second-round pick. There was a lot of people that had him as a second-round pick or even possibly later. And it's like, first year with the organization, and we talked about this too, was Fenton obviously influenced by the existing scouting staff and Brent Flair? Well, of course he was. But if he's not signing off on this deal, we got way bigger problems than reaching for a player around early. Like, way bigger problems than just saying, like, oh, well, this is Brent Flair's pick, and now he's going to get fired, whatever, No, Fenton had to have signed off on this pick. And from all of his comments afterwards, he sounded like he did. Yeah. And that's concerning because this wasn't even a quintessential Wild pick. This was worse. Like, this is worse than any of Chuck Fletcher's draft picks. I mean, Zach Phillips didn't turn out, obviously, but he wasn't. I don't think that he was. I don't remember back this far, but I don't believe he was like an extraordinary reach at pick 28.
No, he wasn't.
He was expected to go there. He just didn't turn out. So, like, Chuck Fletcher actually did pretty well with his first-round pick, save for Phillips.
When he had him.
When he actually had him, which was kind of the problem. So it's just like, that is, man, that, and then the fact that they hadn't made a move before that, like, this is your first impression, and you don't get a second chance at first impressions. And Fenton, like, lost half the Wild fan base with that pick, and it's just brutal. Like, when you need organizational people
off the ledge, please.
Yeah.
Come back. Come on. You too, Joe. Come back off the ledge. Everybody, come down. Come back. Let's calm with the Fire Fen tweets that I saw. Let's hold up on that.
I tweeted one jokingly. I will say that.
I will say these things, not just to be contrarian, but because I believe that somewhere in the depths of my crushed Minnesota sports fan soul. But I will say this. Just in thinking of recent memory where teams made such an egregious reach with a first-round pick, like the Columbus Blue Jackets a couple years ago, going with Pierre-Luc Dubois over Puljujarvi, who went to Edmonton. Such a mocked pick, and now look at it.
Yeah.
I think it was a couple years ago, Boston had 3 first-round picks in succession, and they were mocked for, I think, just about all of those picks. Look at where they're at now.
Yeah.
We got a couple of years before we can fully judge this, so that's why I'm pulling everyone back off the ledge. But the Wild also organizationally have needs everywhere. There is no one area that they needed more than the other. So I'm not against them starting with a right-hand shot defenseman.
Nope.
Sure, they reached for that right-hand shot defenseman who would, Corey Pronman of The Athletic just kind of put it at, it looks like he's going to be a smart defenseman, but, he said, never once did I ask myself, I would love for this guy to be on my team.
Right.
So I'm not totally against this pick. The Wild clearly have a gaping hole at right shot defense in their organization, their pipeline.
Sure.
Obviously, it's not an attractive pick. I'll say that. But, if they were that comfortable in reaching for this kid, then they saw something. So I will have hope that he can develop his game into something else, and in a couple years we'll see. But, I would have loved Dominic Bach. And it's crushing that he went to divisional rival, the Blues, as you pointed out.
Yeah, the next pick.
And then as we saw on day 2, the Wild followed up just by drafting a slew of centers.
Yeah.
And so clearly centers and defensemen were more valued in this draft. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, final thought on the Johansson pick is just come back in off the ledge a little bit, folks, and let's give this some time to breathe. And it wasn't, I don't know, I don't think it'll be as bad as we all think. And again, I'm not saying this wasn't a reach. It was, but let's see what we have to do. I forget who, I think it was Brousseau pointed this out in his podcast last, but Tommy Thompson's last draft in charge of the Wild in 2009 with Chuck Fletcher in his first year turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah. With
the likes of Nick Leddy, Darcy Kemper, Eric Holla, all in that draft before Tommy Thompson was let go. So we'll see what comes. And the thing I liked about the Wild in their second day, and they also did this last year, was they drafted guys who had seemingly a little bit more upside. They were kind of the low-risk, high-reward variety.
For sure.
And that's what I really liked. And they kicked off the day. They didn't have their second-round pick. That was the finale to the Martin Hansel trade. But they kicked off the third round with center Jack McBain. And please, for the love of God, let's let this pick work out just so down the line I can use McBain gifts. I want nothing more than this pick to work so I can use McBain gifts. I am already going to dig into the Simpsons archives and work on McBain
so
gifts.
Many good ones to pick from, too.
And friend of the show, Dave Schwartz, even referenced the Simpsons character McBain on television.
Yeah.
So there you go.
That was great.
I have to shout that to Dave because he
It's
did
tremendous.
that. You have to do that. But reading up on McBain from Corey Pronman, tall center, guy can score, good skill for a bigger guy, and he can be a playmaker. Maybe not the best skater, but there's room to grow. Going again the third round, pick number 86, Alexander Kovanov, a Russian, had a really terrible year, had hepatitis A this season and had to deal with that. So maybe he lost a little bit of value in this draft. Maybe he would have gone sooner.
For sure.
But again, another pretty skilled player, and the Wild again going with a Russian player, hopefully trying to entice somebody to come on over.
I don't know that it works like that because he actually was already playing in the queue. So, and that's a good thing because he's already in North America, so we've got that covered.
Don't worry about that.
But Corey Pronman actually wrote an article about Kovanov and how he's the wild card of the 2018 draft. And this was in about February, I believe, where, he was a first-round type prospect. Before the season started, he was projected that. And then he missed half the season due to this hepatitis issue that he picked up in the Dominican. And then, he played the second half of the season, actually fared pretty well. I believe he was right around a point per game. But they said that you could tell his conditioning obviously hadn't returned quite yet. And he never was a very strong defensive player to begin with. But, Pronman even said elite passer. A guy that's you think of like a Mikael Granlund type playmaker, from the center position. And maybe he can stay there even. I love that pick. I think that's a great value pick. McBain was a great value pick. I think a lot of folks had him going very early in the first round, or very early in the second round. Sorry, He was in the 30s for just about everybody, and the Wild snagged him at 63, which is pretty awesome.
And then with their last pick in the third round, Minnesota Wild select center Connor DeWar, who turned 21 last week. Pronman didn't really have anything on him, so
No.
that was weird, but
No, I'd recapped the
sounds like he's
day
got
2
good
picks.
speed.
Yeah, the day 2 picks ahead of time, and you went and looked at Dewar a little bit, and yeah, he looks like he had pretty good production, but it's really tough to tell. And in the third round, I mean, I think I maybe someone saw that he thought was a draft sleeper. I think it might have been maybe a TSN guy or something like that, but. Yeah, it's tough, but they had three chances to the third round, and I think they did pretty well.
Yeah,
they got
they
2
did reasonably
pretty good
well.
values, and then Dewar, I think, was the guy who that was probably just about right for him going at the very end of the third round. And he obviously has enough offensive upside to where he could very well be worth it someday.
Wild did not pick in the fourth round, and then they get back into it in the fifth round. Defenseman Simon Johansson at pick number 148. Another defenseman pick with Johansson.
Another
as the last
right-handed
name. Yeah.
Swedish defenseman named Johansson.
Yep.
It's weird.
And then going on, center Damien Giroux, pick 155, their second, fifth round pick. Then in the sixth round, winger Sean Boudrias plays in the queue. And then to close out the draft in the seventh round, Minnesota selects Fridley native and future St. Cloud State Husky Sam Hentges.
Henches?
Henches? Whatever, he's going to St. Cloud.
Henchman?
Sorry.
No one cares. Bob Moscow's gone. I like I said, I recapped all the picks. You can find that at zonecoverage.com. All of the day 2 picks were covered by me yesterday. Included videos on all of them, multiple videos on all of them, in fact. Really kind of liked what I saw at a lot of them. The Johansson kid that was taken in the fifth, maybe even more upside than the one they took in the first. He's got a cannon for a shot, even though it's probably unlikely he'll ever be as strong of a defender. The Giroux kid is pretty small, but had pretty solid production, and you could tell he's a leader. You could tell that he checked the character box for the Wild, as they always talk about. And then the other guys, Boudrias and Hentages, they're guys. They're guys that don't have anything that jumps off the page at you. But this is the 6th and 7th round. You're going to take a chance. Maybe something happens. I mean, they're 18-year-old kids. Anything can happen from this point. Any kind of kooky development curve can happen from this point, and maybe you're just kind of hoping for something big with those guys.
No, and like I said, you did a pretty good job of recapping all that on day 2, all those picks on zone coverage, and you were pretty aggressive with telling me to not write anything on Saturday. You just get the hell away from your computer.
It was your anniversary,
Yeah.
so I was like,
I had a little bit of free time in the morning. But
I was laying around the house all day, and I was like, I'll do it.
But
It was all going to be one article anyways.
check that out, and so that's the draft, and I mean it's really hard to go any more on these kids. We can only tell you what they've done, what they
Right.
could be, and you hope for the best, but I don't know.
On a lot of them, it will be rather interesting to follow them for the next year, because the Wild are so thin on prospects. It'll be kind of nice to follow another batch of 8 guys, basically.
Right.
I think Kovanov is a very interesting one, because he's kind of coming back from that injury, and see if his conditioning is back. Hentages is kind of nice. You can watch him more locally than others, being up in St. Cloud. But I don't know. I think Pronman graded this draft a C, and I understand it because
I think the curve on that was the first round pick.
yeah, and it really depends on how you weight the first round pick. If you weight the first round pick like any other pick, I would probably bump them up to a B, because I really do like what they did in the third round. I really like those 3 players, especially the first 2. But you have to weight the first round pretty strong. And, they didn't trade down and get more assets with that first round pick. They didn't take a guy who could really be a home run. They took a guy whose ceiling is probably a second pair defenseman. They took a Jonas Brodin clone, as it were, with probably less skating ability. And so, yeah, you got to weight that pretty heavily, and that's how you end up with a C, and I totally agree with that grade.
So, yeah, like I said, pretty uneventful NHL draft. Day 2 rolled around. We actually had a pretty big trade between Carolina and Calgary. Calgary sending Dougie Hamilton, I think it was Michael Furland, and a prospect.
Adam Fox.
To Carolina for Noah Hannafin and
Lindholm.
Yeah, Elias Lindholm. And it seemingly was going that way, as it was reported, I think, the day before, that Lindholm and Carolina had talks go just completely sideways for a new contract, so not surprising. But what is surprising is Dougie Hamilton traded again, and it's a little bit uninspiring to see all the kind of hit pieces on him come out now, as that's what happens when a player gets traded, I guess. You got to send him with a firing squad. But, man, what a terrible trade for the Flames. And I think it was Travis Yost tweeted out, I don't know, maybe it was Dim Filipovic, one of those guys. It was just basically like, sigh, looks like it'll be another preseason where we're jumping on the Carolina Hurricanes bandwagon again. But
hard to argue with that.
That's a great trade for Carolina, and I hope, I don't know, I just hope for that team's sake, like, they can, like, pull it around this next year and figure it out. And I think the big thing you kind of take away from that trade is it makes a trade for Justin Falk really likely, because Carolina is just now loaded on the right side, and makes it a lot easier for the Hurricanes to move on from Justin Falk. Has 2 seasons left on his contract. Like, it was like $4.8 million cap hit or something, but heaven forbid the Minnesota Wild made a trade involving Matt Dumba. Probably likely they make a run at Justin Falk to reload that spot on the right side that Dumba would leave. But yeah, that was kind of it. Like I said, the Philip Grubauer trade on day 1, going from Washington, Colorado. Man, what a woof. I wouldn't want to do that, but that was really it. There was just, the minor, draft day trades where teams move up to grab somebody they really want, but player activity, not a lot. So
I think a lot of teams, and they very much mentioned this on the draft telecast, a lot of teams waiting on the Tavares shoe to drop. A lot of teams waiting on the Kovalchuk shoe to drop, and that finally did. That's another little tidbit of news. He signs with the Kings for 3 years, which is hilariously fitting that he ends up with the Kings. But
why? What are the Kings doing? I don't get it.
The Kings, I don't know. It's like Lombardi still runs that team. So everyone's just kind of waiting for Tavares to decide where he's going to go, and then apparently things are going to, the floodgates are going to open after that, which we hear about that kind of stuff all the time, and then sometimes it never really does. Like, he's supposedly meeting with 5 teams, whenever the imaginary period starts that nobody follows. And then we'll find out probably next Sunday who he's actually going to sign with. And then maybe the trades will happen. I mean, the Palman trade happened after free agency by a couple of days. So, but in reality, I mean, it has to happen in the next 2 weeks here. It either happens right before free agency or it happens right after free agency, when teams discovered, hey, I missed out on a guy I thought I was going to get, and now I need to make a move. So, those tweaks that everyone is waiting for, if they're going to happen.
It was pretty speculated that the trade market is going to be housed up until Tavares kind of makes up his mind.
Basically.
And also, like, Ryan O'Reilly, big player that everyone pegged to be moved. He's got a $7.5 million bonus that kicks in on July 1st. So some were kind of wondering if maybe a framework of a deal is agreed upon, but they're just waiting for July 1st to roll around to make that deal. Just so Buffalo kicks in that $7.5 million and kind of maybe gets a little sweeter asset coming back their way.
Yeah.
But just hopefully that picks up this week. And just like I said, what a terrible draft just for, like, trades or anything.
Yeah, there wasn't a ton of excitement. I mean, the first round I felt like there was a lot of reaches. The Wild certainly weren't the only team to reach. So the first round was a little weird. It was a little wonky. There was, A lot of guys that fell to the first round. I mean, I think half the guys I featured fell out of the first round, and I thought they were all kind of, bona fide end of the first round type guys that if they did drop, they wouldn't go much further. But, it wasn't much. I mean, it really was the big nothing. It was like the ending of The Matrix. It was just there wasn't a whole lot there.
Man, I haven't been that disappointed since Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice.
But were you really disappointed by that? Because,
no.
Yeah.
Ooh, Batman news. Ben Affleck is done as Batman.
Yeah, I saw that. Well,
and they rioted in the streets after.
Yeah, I mean, does anyone care about those freaking DC movies? I don't know.
No. I still haven't seen Justice League.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Wonder Woman. I heard it was good. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Just have no interest.
No longer working at a movie theater, my appetite to go pay $20 to see a movie now it's just not there.
Mine never has been, so
yeah.
It's kind of the difference.
You've made that clear in the history of this podcast.
I haven't seen a movie in theaters in 4 years.
There's something about this podcast recording in St. Paul prior to James Taylor concerts.
Tell me about it. Oh my God, it's James Taylor playing right now. Did you notice that?
Sweet Christ.
Oh, yeah, that was a lot of fun going downtown to Tom Reed's for the draft. And Tom Reed's, the preeminent hockey bar in St. Paul, is hosting a before party held by a local radio station. They're hosting a pre-James Taylor concert party as the NHL draft is starting. So didn't even get the audio for the NHL draft, just got a bunch of James Taylor on a loop as we sat down to enjoy the NHL draft at the most famous hockey bar in the Twin Cities. We had to deal with a bunch of rich 50-somethings listening to Easy Listening. And, yeah, that's tons of fun.
I don't know if you caught this, but the Wild tweeted out from their account places you can watch the draft that are their official, bars. Okay. They have official bars in the Twin Cities.
Sure.
They had 2 places in St. Paul. It's so weird. Tom Reed's is not one of them. How? How is that possible?
Well, because they had this sweet James Taylor pre-party going on. That's why. They already committed to that.
That was so weird, but woof. But I digress. So kind of what's next for the Minnesota Wild here is, like we said, week leading up to free agency on July 1st. I would expect the trade market to kind of be pretty active. I got to imagine, now that John Carlson has re-signed Washington, I got to imagine the market for Erik Karlsson's just going to vastly heat up.
Insanity.
I don't think I put this out there in the last show, but a couple shows ago when we had the Evolving Wild guys and Data Stats on, we talked about players we want to win the Stanley Cup. I have decided that Erik Karlsson, whatever team he goes to next, he's going to be my new Ovechkin / Capitals. I want Erik Karlsson to win the Stanley Cup so badly right now that it kind of supersedes everything else. Don't get me wrong, I love Henrik Lundqvist. He's still up there, favorite player in the league, but the Rangers are not going anywhere.
Yeah,
so I have to be realistic, but I hope that next team that Erik Karlsson goes to is the Golden Knights.
Oh, wow. That would be... It's interesting. They've got a ton of cap space, so they're being brought up with Tavares.
Yeah.
They're being brought up with Karlsson. They certainly have the assets. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, but yeah, that's a lot of fun. Something we haven't talked about, actually, was a trade that happened. Actually, 2 trades that happened where Mike Hoffman found himself a new home, and then he found himself a new home again.
What was your favorite Mike Hoffman Sharks moment?
Yeah, it was, the Sharks basically, acquired Hoffman, who, we've all heard the story. There's a tire fire going down there. Apparently his fiancée is not a very nice lady and was doing some pretty horrible things to Erik Karlsson's wife, who just lost a child this season. And so, yeah, the Sharks trade for him, and then about an hour later, turn him around and trade him right back to the Florida Panthers for a boatload of draft picks. So they really kind of came out ahead on that deal. The winner of either one of those deals was the Sharks. I mean, I don't care what you say, but
Ottawa, man,
Ottawa was just like got completely jobbed on that deal, which was kind of hilarious and very fitting.
I legitimately feel for anyone who is a fan of the Ottawa Senators.
Right.
I know those numbers are rapidly decreasing with each passing day, but man, I feel so, especially like Erik Karlsson's going to probably get moved this week, and it's just like, how deflating is that? Like,
that's a situation where there's a lot of situations where I don't think the owner has a lot to do with team success. Like, I don't think Craig Leopold has hurt or helped the Wild a ton. He has helped the Wild in that he's willing to pay up to the cap every season, and Fenton mentioned that when he came in. Maybe he's hurt the Wild a little bit with his loyalty, but it kind of balances out. Eugene Melnyk
he makes
does
Craig
not
Leopold look like a
out.
saint.
Does not balance out at all. That guy has just torpedoed his own hockey team to the point where I don't know if they're going to sign a free agent. Who the hell wants to play there at this point?
Aaron Gabrick plays there, don't forget.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. He got dealt there for Phaneuf.
Yeah.
Oh, that poor bastard. Gross.
Yeah, part of the albatross contract trade between Phaneuf and Gabrick. Like, this is why the NHL contract lengths that we discussed last week needs to be short, because too many players just kind of hose down the market because there's untradeable contracts. Like, we got to figure this out.
Yep.
Figure it out in the next CBA. And apparently, there's optimism that there will not be a lockout in 2020.
Bull.
After the players' escrow has apparently just been, like,
whittled down,
decreasing every year, which they all love. So
sure,
there's quote-unquote optimism.
Whatever.
Anyway.
Believe it when I see it, as will every other hockey fan.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting week. I hope for our sake, for people who have to try to write and do a podcast on the Minnesota Wild, there's a little bit more activity. But, yeah, I mean, we got free agency starts July 1st next Sunday. We'll probably try to do a later show to make sure we get everything in. Yeah. But I guess I'll ask, do you kind of have any like pressing needs for the Wild and maybe free agency? Like a bottom six center and a third pairing defenseman would be kind of on my list. Maybe a right shot third pairing defenseman.
Yes.
And then maybe, this kind of, I tweeted this out the other day, but like the goalie market is very strong right now, and the Wild could definitely make some sort of an upgrade at backup goaltender.
Yes.
With all respect to a former UMD Bulldog on the roster, but if you can, you have to do it, because this is a league that's like becoming, you got to start your number one like 50, 55 games a year, and you got to have a strong number two to play the rest if you want to have good postseason success.
I would love to have a backup goalie that challenges Dubnyk. I would love to have a Grubauer type, a Carter Hutton type, UC Saros type, where you can put him in. It's like, great, let's go. Like, no big deal. And I know a lot of people felt that way about Stalock until about midseason. And then the wheels absolutely came off of Stalock, and there's really no denying that. So I'm with you on that. It would be interesting to see. In the end, I don't think they do, just because, Stalock is cost-controlled for this year. But it would be nice. It'd be nice if they had a backup goalie that you can say, well, yeah, he could start on an NHL team if they were desperate enough. But more importantly, he pushes Dubnyk, and he could maybe push for, more towards 25, 30 starts a year instead of, the 15 to 20 that we've been seeing out of backups during Dubnyk's time here, under multiple coaches, no less.
Right. That's kind of what to look for in free agency. No, the Wild are not going to be meeting with John Tavares because they have all that cap space. Like, have some damn, like, be realistic. Just because the Wild have $60 million in cap space doesn't mean they're going to sign John Tavares.
They still have to sign Zucker and Dunn, but that's going to cost 10 right off the bat. At least.
I just want to watch the hockey world burn. So I want John Tavares to sign a 1-year deal with Toronto because they have all that space.
Yeah.
Nothing will make hockey Twitter implode more than John Tavares signing with the Maple Leafs for 1 year.
I want to see him go to Vegas. I want to see Vegas build a super team.
Somebody
just
wrote about this.
for the hell of
Toronto
it.
could do like a little bit of cap circumvention where they can sign John Tavares for like 1 year, like $15 million this year.
Yeah.
And then like later on at the end of next year, they can sign him to the max 8-year deal because he will have
He's a
then
player,
technically
yeah.
played for that team.
Right.
And they could sign it to a little less AAV, but if you balance it all out, it comes out to this, which would be
Right.
the most beneficial to John Tavares,
Yeah.
which nobody else can offer. And I'm just like, he's going to sign with the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's going to happen because NHL GMs do nothing better than circumvent the salary cap.
And it's 2 separate contracts, so it's not against the rules at all, to your point. So, yeah, they could sign him to theoretically a 9-year deal with an AAV in the $12 million range, but he's going to get a ton of it up front with that 1-year deal. That makes a lot of sense. I'd be interested to see if there's something like that happens. Until the next CBA, of course, which they shoot that kind of stuff down.
And the next CBA will probably include the signing bonuses, which everyone has, and it's all just like front-loaded the deal. And
Right.
apparently Gary Bettman told all the owners to quit doing that because you're going to kill yourself financially in the next lockout. But I digress. The last thing I have on my list is we have a lot of jersey news.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Here to start the third period. What team is this? It's not Team USA. Oh, yes, it is. They've got on new uniforms. They're wearing the logo of the Duck. I've never seen this before.
Some of it good, some of it bad.
So we're going to lead with the thing that made me very, very happy this weekend. The Arizona Coyotes did everyone a huge favor and did what we have been preaching for a long time.
Yeah.
They went back to the Kachina jerseys from their original days. It is wonderful.
Yes.
Nothing made me smile more than seeing them do that. Robo Coyote, bring it all back.
Yeah.
And they did a really good job of pretty much having the same thing. There's a little tweaks here and there for the Adidas,
it's
whatever, but
almost identical.
It's the same thing. And also, as I tweeted out, shout out to Dan Mick for thrifting one for me a few months ago.
No kidding. Nice.
He found one at a thrift store. I
blank
think you
one?
and I were both in on that question.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
I think it's like a children's large or something, so the sleeves are a little short, but I'll deal with it. So, very happy to have that in my closet. And honestly, the Coyotes regulars are just horrible. So
there's
I'm
nothing,
glad that they have chosen this way of life.
It is a little disappointing they're only wearing them on home Saturday games, but it's kind of a cool gimmick. They're calling it Kachina Saturdays, and that's, I'm sure, going to be a lot of fun for an area that isn't really synonymous with hockey fun. So I don't know. I look forward to it. I'm glad they made that move. Those jerseys are just, they're kind of ugly in a beautiful way, and they're certainly off the beaten path.
They've aged well.
There is no doubt about it. That is a jersey from the Southwest United States, and that's what we like the most about them. It's just, aside from being a 90s throwback, which we're kind of always suckers for, there's really not a lot of argument that jersey is a pretty solid look.
Speaking of 90s and killing it with throwback stuff right now, we have to talk about the Anaheim Ducks, who are just absolutely shredding it to start their 25-season tour, if you will.
Sure.
Like with their throwback video the other day with
Linda
Cohn and Guy Hebert and the vintage logos was just a thing of beauty when their schedule was released. And they are basically toying with us at this point that there's going to be a throwback night for the Mighty Ducks, which
that would be amazing.
It's going to happen.
Yeah,
let's be honest. That's going to happen. But anyway, other jersey news that we have so far was Philadelphia Flyers really quietly on their Instagram said they are bringing the Winter Classic black jerseys from a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
Back
I didn't
as
see
their
that.
third this year.
Interesting.
I think it was Sports Logos had that the Flyers very secretly on their Instagram said this when the schedule was released, and it's like basically like every Saturday or something home game. So it's just basically the black with orange trim, and I'm not against that.
No, I mean, it works for them. If any team is going to just make up a black jersey, it's like, well, the Flyers, that was a pretty solid look for them for many years. So,
And then speaking of black, the Carolina Hurricanes went back to a black jersey, and they somehow whiffed on that. I don't know how you do that, but
it just
holy moly.
They tried too hard, I feel like. It's essentially, if you remember the third jersey of yore with the Hurricanes, where it was the warning flags, it's the same jersey. Like, they redid the logo, but the logo was essentially the same. And so, I don't know. And obviously there's different details to the jerseys, but it's just like...
Ghost logo.
Yeah, they put ghosted logos on the shoulders. And it's just like, I don't know. I mean, just there's nothing there that excites me at all. It's a very, I don't know. I mean, it's not horrible. I'm not going to say that it's, I despise it, but there's, like, as you mentioned, there's lots of piping.
I was going to say, I said this to you. I was like, why is piping still a thing? Why? That should have died last year.
With
piping,
Reebok, yeah.
No, it should be passed.
Yes.
And it is not. If you take away the piping and the weird, like, ghost-looking shoulders, like, I don't think it's that terrible, but the Hurricanes somehow found a way to mess this up.
Yeah.
Just bust out the Whaler throwbacks for crying all out at this point. Like, God.
If they would have made a jersey that was not a Whalers throwback, but even had a nod to the Whalers, like, you could have very subversely, like, put in something, it would take me a couple hours on a computer to come up with something, but, you're the Hurricanes, they're the Whalers, you could use any kind of imagery that kind of tie either one of those two together that you want. You can even use a whale if you want to, because the hurricane isn't an actual, like, thing. It's a weather event. But they didn't, and instead they basically recreated their original third jersey, which was nothing special, into a kind of newish but basically the same thing jersey that is nothing special.
So that's the third jersey news for this week. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more next week as teams kind of start to reveal what they're going to do. And
yeah, and important also with the Anaheim, they did not reveal their third jersey at the draft like everyone thought they would. But, as we mentioned last week, apparently they are going to use the Mighty Ducks logo on a black jersey.
They're wearing the logo of the duck.
has not
one.
Actually officially been announced yet, but we will wait on that. Maybe with the free agency signing? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. Hopefully there'll be good news this week on that. But
yeah.
We'll see. All right. That could probably do it for us.
Sure.
I think we vented enough, if you will. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, nothing. I wanted to do something not hockey, but I don't know.
All right, I'll end it with this.
Okay.
The gift that is Bob McKenzie continues to give, as whether Bob is slamming somebody who is trying to critique his grammar and then themselves messes up on grammar, right, or simply him saying his best player available was rated number 69 on his board, and he follows that up by tweeting, "Nice." Bob McKenzie continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. Even his own son made a nod to the legend on Saturday after the draft, where he tweeted a picture of Bob's margarita mixer, and said, I think it was something along the lines of, I would like to have hope that, he said, at TSN, Bob McKenzie loves me more than this, but we all know that's wrong. So Bob McKenzie is the gift that keeps on giving. So yeah, that can wrap it up for the Giles and the Goalie podcast. You can find Ben and I on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell, podcast Twitter at GATG Wild Podcast. We write for a website called Zone Coverage. You can go to zonecoverage.com/wild for all our written material. Find this otherwise fine show on iTunes, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Spotify. And with that, we will chat with you again next week.
Later.
That's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.